Frontline Gaming presents 40K Stat Center with your hosts Val Heffelfinger and the Falcon.
A bunch of nerds battled it out in the Bible Belt this weekend at the Iron Halo.
And we take a seat where the elite meet to treat at No Retreat 8.
Finally, the Falcon breaks down the data on the state of Space Marines going into the Iron Father Farios meta.
Woo! We have returned. Sorry for the week hiatus, folks. Somehow y'all decided not to hold any events for us to cover last week, for the first time in months I might add, and Val did his best to try and permanently blind himself with a butter knife.
Hey.
So rather than just sit here and talk about how amazing our shit smell like some other hosts might be wont to do, we held our tongues until there was something really worth talking about. Please be patient with us. We've just hired on a social media representative to keep you folks more up to date with what we're up to going forward. And by that I mean we're just going to force Tony to do it.
Yeah, and you know what? This extra hiatus, Peter, I think I'd like to introduce a new segment. I think we could. I think we should just do a little hobby progress.
Okay, sure.
Oh, no, you put the yes and game with me. I'm just kidding. This week we'll be covering the weirdly auspicious Iron Halo GT and No Retreat 8, as well as go over where Space Marines stand after being in the meta for just over a month, before we go into what many people may fear will be a dark power armor-dominated time. Judging by the reactions online, it appears we can expect every non-Marine player in the world to die come October 5th, when the Iron Hands Codex supplement starts seeing tournament play.
Yep. Before we get started, we should always show that obligatory love to the Frontline Gaming Network. This week you can check out Pablo Rule 34 Martinez, the Falcon myself, Ridvan the Dark Sun Martinez, and Jason Toots Horn on Chapter Tactics as they cover the Iron Halo, how to handle proxies at your event, and just how gently the FAQ touched us all. Chapter Tactics. They try to be legitimate, but someone keeps inviting me on the show, and I can openly admit that I don't know what I'm doing.
Also, take a peep at The Art of War with John Damaris and Nick Nanavati. This week's episode features ace pilot Anthony Chu as he dive bombs the opposition while discussing Eldari flyers in 40K.
And of course, tune in live every Wednesday on Twitch and to your favorite podcast den of Promiscuity on Fridays for Signals from the Frontline, where this week Reese and Jason probably talk about the FAQ, make mention of the new Cities of Sigmar stuff for AOS, and generally yell at clouds. We're not really sure because it hasn't happened yet, and Jason is a fucking maverick, so you never know what he's actually going to do.
Lastly, big shout out to our bestest buddies over at Best Coast Pairings. They're pretty swell, and so is their app, so download it, subscribe, and enjoy the flow of information.
Tournament news is made possible by BestCoastPairings.com. And download the BCP TO app to organize events for just about any tabletop game system. Download the player app to easily find and participate in events from around the world. Subscribe to BCP for as little as $5 a month and support the team and unlock additional features. Available for iOS and Android. BestCoastPairings.com. Competitive events easier.
Oklahoma, where the wind comes sweeping down the plain, and the waving wheat can sure smell sweet when the wind comes right behind the rain. Oklahoma, every night my honey lamb and I sit alone and talk and watch a hawk making lazy circles in the sky.
Yeah. Let's just not do that again.
Why, what's up?
That's pretty rough. That was...
I thought I nailed it.
Listen, I think you're really...
Hey now, I can't help myself. How can you not be excited? Our first coverage in 2 weeks and it's a doozy. This last weekend, 104 players sauntered into the On the Rock Ministries in Bartlesville, Oklahoma to take part in the 5th annual Iron Halo GT, an ITC major event Not only does Iron Halo generally mark a turning point in our current 8th edition meta as the first event to fully implement the recent fall FAQ, and the last major event before the onset of Iron Hands and whatever other nonsense GW throws at us. It is also the final event in the vaunted Lord Commander series. 40K Stats correspondent and event TO Jason the Rusty Trombone Horn was kind enough to let us in on his secrets.
Hi, my name is Jason Horn of the Iron Halo. Our event has been going on for 5 years, and we started it because there were no other events in our area. It is held at On the Rock Ministries here in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. And On the Rock is an awesome, amazing charity which helps disadvantaged youth by supporting after-school programs, tutoring, and programming programs to help them find their college and life career paths. The meta, or meta, was very diverse, with a majority, about 25%, were Space Marines. The other percentages were around, another 25% Chaos, Xenos, and the like.
Now, as far as we know, the event ran pretty smoothly, with only one quote-unquote issue springing up that we are aware of. The event was streamed via Twitch at twitch.tv/IronHaloTV and featured commentators from a series of communities, including the guys from TFG Radio, as well as Reese Richard Robbins, Pablo Martinez, and Ridvan Skari. And I believe even the guys from Down Under Pairing showed up very briefly. We highly recommend you check them out. There are some really great insights to be gleaned there. The issue that we note occurred in the 4th round of the event and on stream, when Matt Root's proxied Assault Centurions and Drop Pod were pulled from the table for not being pre-approved.
We did have a situation happen in the middle of Game 4 with a well-known player, Matt Root, having me pull his models because they were not converted. The rule of the story, ladies and gentlemen, is if you have any third-party or converted models, be sure to check with your TO to make sure they're approved, or they will be pulled when you least expect it.
Indeed, Jason. Day 2 on stream would definitely qualify as when I would least expect something like that to be enforced. But if you're looking for more information, dear listener, Jason does cover this issue in further depth on Chapter Tactics this week. Matt would drop from the event after the ruling and apologize for not following the player packet by sending pictures of the models into the organizers for pre-approval. So, Mr. Rutt, GG on that one, I guess.
Yeah, stop being a bad person.
Well,
God damn it.
He's a doctor.
He's terrible. I guess. He gets one. Anyway, after 5 rounds of hot, sweaty, man-on-man action, the Iron Halo would come down to 3 undefeated players. Kyle, or Sile, the Cogitator Thompson, with his monofaction AdMech. Nick, the Copperhead Gower, running all of the Venoms GW has ever released, along with a few Inari models. And the eventual winner of the event, Nick, the Cyberdoc Sutherland, and his Orks, who absolutely lambasted poor Wes, the most royal of Tenenbaum's Anderson's Knights, and Shadow Sword in the final. Let's take a quick look at some of these lists.
Okay, why don't we, lad? Well, never you mind, Peter. I'm just going to dive in there and figure out how to say all this AdMech stuff. All right, so we got Kyle. I'm going Kyle Thompson. He's running AdMech.
I believe it's Thompson.
Oh, Sile Thompson.
Yeah,
you're
that must
absolutely
be.
Correct. He's running a Mars Battalion, Peter. It's very serious. With the operative requisition sanctioned extra assassin strat deployed. The HQ is Baller Series Call and a Tech Priest engine series. Then got 3 units of 5 Rangers. Nothing too fancy in there. And then we got 2 units of Fulgurite Electro Priests, said every syllable. There's 9 of them in the first unit, 10 of them in the second one. And then in heavy support, we got 3 Onager Dune Crawlers with the Icarus Arrays. And then 4 Scorpion Dune Riders. Hey-oh.
Scorpius, but it's okay. You're doing really well. I'm proud of you.
Fuck. And, and a little guy sneaking in at the bottom there. That's right. It's the Terex Pattern Termite Assault Drill. Very nice little piece of kit there. Then we have another Mars Battalion detachment. This one has a Daedalus.
Yeah, Daedalosus.
Damn it. Tech Priest Engine Seer. It's got another 2 units of Rangers, and then we got a unit of Skitarii Vanguard with an Alpha rocking a Radium Carbine. In the heavy support slot, 3. Here they are. Scorpius Disintegrators with all of that good stuff for no points.
Yeah, this is quite the scary list. It's quite the gun line. Kyle's going to go into it a little more in detail there, but those Scorpius Disintegrators do work. They're absolutely terrifying. And Mr. Daedalosus at 50 points for a +1 to hit 6-inch bubble just makes AdMech so ridiculous. I love it. Ugh. That's the noise I would make about this list.
Well, that's very good. I was going to say, I was hoping that you'd be able to at least do, a modem sound in celebration of the Machine God, but, whatever, dude.
Well, listen, so many moons ago when I worked in technical support as a teenager for the old school dial-up internet, because I'm an ancient man, I worked with a man who would use the modem sounds to try to determine what was wrong with people's computers.
Right.
He would specifically ask them, he would be like, did your computer make this noise? It was quite annoying. Yeah, like that, except with his mouth.
Was he the guy from Police Academy?
No, he was terrible at it, actually. I don't know what he was trying to accomplish.
Okay.
He may have had an issue. Anyway.
Well, here's something you should accomplish. Why don't you seamlessly read off a Dark Eldar list?
I'll do my best. So Nick Gower, he ran a Cabal of the Blackheart Battalion detachment with 2 Archons.
Screwed up already. It's Cabal.
They were rocking Husk Blades, and one was running a Phantasm grenade launcher. He then had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Cabalite warrior squads, all of them rocking a single blaster in the squad, and these are 5-man units. He then had a Cabalite Trueborn squad with 4 blasters, and then a second Trueborn squad with 4 shredders, a Lamian, 14 Venoms, and then he rounded it out with an Ari Supreme Command detachment with an Otark Skyrunner, and an Ari who was his warlord. Otark. The Incarn, and Ivrain.
This is a list after the Scari's heart. Did he tip his cap at it on Chapter Tactics this week?
He did a little bit, but I guess he went a little more in depth on his own show when he does a Meta Mondays analysis show where he covers the undefeated lists from the previous weekend. And he gave it its due then. One thing Jason Horn did mention on Chapter Tactics, if people listen to us and don't listen to them, so the Iron Halo did use the full FAQ that was only released 2 days before the event, so long as it didn't impact point scores. So they made the decision because in the FAQ you can no longer the Court of the Archon models no longer count towards dedicated transports, which would have made this list illegal because the Lamian you can't take a Venom due to the Lamian, but they let Nick do that in this situation just because it would have changed his list up by that 80 points or whatnot.
Oh, okay. Well, that's very magnanimous of the TOs.
Yeah, and I mean, really, they basically gave the players 24 hours to adjust their lists, which isn't enough time, and they made that known to players that they would use the FAQ, but if it would drastically impact the build of their list, it would make their list illegal, then that would fly.
I'm not gonna lie to you, I as a player, I prefer that, even when they are extreme changes. I hate a stale meta,
I agree. It was kind of one of the little disappointments out of Nova was that they couldn't use the Space Marine Codex.
Yeah.
Given that it had been released but it didn't meet their deadline. Everybody has their own way of play. Yeah.
Yeah. Once upon a time, FLG used to have a real devil may care attitude towards rules and stuff, but they've changed that in recent years, and I guess it's fine.
Well, I know that they did have some problems. There was I think it was a SoCal Open, or maybe it was a BAO a few years back, where they decided to use an FAQ that was relatively new, and it caused a couple players to get a little annoyed as they were already on their way. They had traveled like across the ocean to play, and they
Yeah.
were already on their way to play by the time the FAQ was released. So I know that they have kind of
That was
toned
the
it
rule
back.
of three. That was the rule of three FAQ.
Maybe it was. Yeah, actually, I think you're right. But in this case, I mean, SoCal, they're only having it like a 1 week breakdown with it was just announced. So you have up to a week before the event. Everything could change for you.
Everything and nothing at the same time.
More than likely.
Speaking of things that haven't changed, Orks kicking ass. Nick Sutherland. That's right, guys. I'm going to do another list. It's a battalion detachment of evil sons, led by a big mech with the RIP custom force field on foot, no mega armor, old school warboss on warbike, with a power claw, of course, and the shooter knocking off 2 points, looking for those efficiencies wherever you can find them. This guy's cunning, and then he's got 3 units of 29 boys plus the knob. And then we have another battalion detachment. This one, Death Skulls. Of course, our friend, the Dreadwad detachment, rocking that relic shock attack gun with a big mech. He's got another 2 normal shock attack guns, no relics there, for a total of 3. And then he's got 3 units of 10 Gretchen. And then in heavy support, he's got, a bunch of mech guns. They're all smasher guns. I'm going to guess roughly 12. That's a lot of smasher.
You guessed correctly just by counting them.
Whew, thank goodness. All right, and then finally we have a Bad Moons Battalion detachment. What could be in here, folks? 2 weird boys, about 33 Gretchen in 3 different units, and then we've got a heavy support of 15 Ludas with the throwback choice. Going back to the Ludas, digging deep. This is an old school Codex list right here. We got boys, we got smasher guns. It's great.
This is a super shooty list too. Like this outshoots a ton of stuff on the table right now.
Yeah, well, just the shock attack guns and the Ludas and the smash guns. Yes. But
it's good. I like it.
Of course, it's good.
I like this new turn back to mech guns. Like when you looked at the Ork Codex when it first came out, that was one of the units that everybody kind of glommed onto at first. Mm-hmm. Everyone was like, look at how cheap these things are. It's absolutely stupid. There's no reason why you wouldn't run 18. And then people started thinking, well, maybe you shouldn't run 18 because of how ITC works. And so you barely saw any for a long time. But then over the last month or 2 months or so, it was at first there was 4, then 5, then 6. And now, like, we're seeing 10 to 12 pretty frequently on the North American side. In the UK, everyone's straight up just running 18 because they don't know how to just not run the max of whatever squad they can. They don't half-ass it over there. It's like, well, if 6 work, then 18 work better.
That's absolutely the case. And I'm also glad in the ITC world that, we're seeing a lot of examples of people just not giving an F about Killmore and giving it up. Because you're going to do that with Smash Against faux show. And
for sure.
Yeah.
Early on, at least. But then hopefully you make that up by just killing your opponent before they can do anything about it in the late game.
Yeah, it's like with the Siegler Talus, it was just dismissed out of hand. How could that be good? And the answer is there's more than 2 turns. And to go into greater depth on those other 4 turns, plus the first 2 of them, we asked all 3 of our standard set of questions to give us a run through their thoughts on the event, their list, their choices, how they played out, and then we added the option to discuss how much they considered the Space Marines release when making their lists and where they feel that meta is going. Sile and Nick Sutherland were more than happy to oblige, but unfortunately for your lovers of the Dark Kin, Nick Gower has apparently disappeared back into the webway and will not return until the Lord Marshal series resumes in November. With Nick Gower unable to provide us with any information, we also reached out to a stoic Wes Anderson for his take on the event and having his dreams stolen away by the mouth from the south, Nick Sutherland. Let's hear from him first.
I had a blast, and I won some gold-plated dice. Jason, his judges, and our host, the Rock Ministries, always put on a smooth, fun, highly competitive event, and this year was the best one so far. In my list, every unit has a specific role to fill. The Knights are there to put pressure, the Shadow Sword and Command Executioner are there to destroy big targets, the Command Punisher and Wyverns are there to destroy hordes. As long as everyone does their part, I tend to do pretty well. If I lose one of those groups round 1 or early on in the game, it turns into an uphill battle real quick. That's a tough one. It's close between the Wyverns and the Shadow Sword, but I think the Shadow Sword wins MVP. The ability to obliterate one major target a turn is really helpful against things like Disco Lords, Daredeo, Dreadnoughts, and Knights. Also, using the Crush 'em strat and charging the Shadow Sword into combat is always a good time. It was definitely against the Orks round 5 in the final match. You expect to see Ludas and shock attack guns, but 12 Smasher guns on top of that was painful. He had more guns, more bodies, more mobility, and more range than my list. I knew it was going to be a really hard match, and Spearhead Assault for deployment only made it that much harder. I had to deploy aggressively if I was going to even attempt to make it across the table and make something happen. Hiding would have just given him free reign of the board. I am definitely not used to being outgunned, so I had to risk deploying in the open and hope for the seize roll to go my way. I played one Ultramarine list. I deployed the Shadow Sword, Knights, and Guardsmen full front to counter the triple Invictus Warsuit threat. I went first and moved everything straight at him. Killed a Daredeo, an Invictus Warsuit, 6 aggressors, and left 1 Invictus Warsuit with 2 wounds left. Over the next 2 rounds, he killed all 3 Knights. Calgar even came out and showed my Knight Warden what the Gauntlets of Ultramar can do. The next round, Calgar went down to a Volcano Cannon in the face, and that only left 2 Thunderfire Cannons left to clean up.
Oh man, what an overly excited dude. Next up, we've got Kyle Thompson dropping some knowledge on his transport-filled gun line. Kyle is a well-known face in the competitive AdMech world, though he's perhaps best known as being one of the old progenitors of the Samael Triple Talon Master lists that had a brief time in the sun about 6 months or so ago. Let's cut to some clips from the man himself.
So how my list kind of works is it's an AdMech gun line. It's 3 crawlers and 3 disintegrators piled around call. And then also the pilot transports for mobility and delivery of both my troops and my priests. A really cool thing about this is it has a pretty low amount of drops with only 14. Finally, I have an assassin, so I get a little bit of a sideboard, be able to tailor my army in a way to whatever I'm playing against. And honestly, it feels like I'm playing Battle Company in a way. I have 11 hulls on the table with 10 plus wounds each, and then all my small squishy things are all hidden either inside transports or are off the table. MVPs of my list were definitely the disintegrators, 3 tanks with indirect fire, D6 missile launcher, and 9 stubber shots, on a 12-inch move platform that doesn't have any penalties when it's moving is just huge. The ability for them just to reach out and touch and have relevant shooting to almost any target in the game is just paramount. But honestly, also the humble transport is just keeping my troops alive, keeping the priests alive, delivering the priests to the targets that they need to get into, and then also them providing move blocking and absorbing Overwatch was absolutely critical in almost every one of my games. The hardest matchup of the weekend was probably Dan Salmon's Chaos Dreadnought and Disco Lords soup thing. His list is really kind of hard to pick secondaries against. If you pick Headhunter, you only really get the Lord Discos and a couple characters that hit him behind Plague Bearers. If you pick Big Game, you have to you have to kill all the Dreadnoughts. Picking both of them together is basically saying, hey, I'm going to board you, which is kind of just a poor plan overall, just because there's so many wounds on the table. Finally, his list has it's a poor assassin choices. I'm not able to really pick things that, like I usually pick the Calidus, for example, but the Calidus isn't really a good choice there. So how did the game go? Well, I wound up choosing the Cluxus with Big Game, Recon, and Engineers. And my Engineers was a transport and a set of Rangers, which kind of perplexed him a little bit. However, it was ITC Mission 5, So I had a precious cargo objective that I just piled my whole army on. That was opposite of his, and we had pointy down a war. So kind of no matter where I went, if I just had rangers as my engineers, they just get killed because of his Dorito indirect fire. However, they were certainly not going to chew through the transport and the guys inside the transport when he needed all of the shooting to deal with my 11 hulls that are on the table. He wound up setting up to go second. However, he won the role to go first and took it, and then kind of realized that he was set up to give me a 12-inch charge with my priests, which means his Lord Discos really didn't do too much turn one. They just kind of sat there and waited for his shooting to do some work. Turn 3 was a really big swing turn. He had all of the shooting up at that point, and then one Disco Lord, but he did with all of his butcher cannons, he did like 8 wounds total amongst all my vehicles, and I was only down 1 of my disintegrators. In my counterpunch, I picked up his Lord Disco, one of the Doritos, all of his troops, so both his Brimstones and the remainder of his Plague Bearers, and his Nurgle Herald, and grabbed the bonus point with my Cluxus that jumped in the northwest corner that grabbed his bonus point. After that was really big, honestly, a 5-point turn, and then I was able to hold more for a couple turns after that. Really got me ahead on primary, and helped me max my secondaries, almost max my secondaries. Because one of the mistakes he did was he chose Mark for Death on my crawlers, which are honestly a bit of a trap because they are a 5-up rolling 1 invo. Not that it really mattered against him with all his -1 shooting, but they're surprisingly tanky, and I do have 2 repair guys running around in my deployment zone. He also picked Old School, which is a fine setup. I mean, he's not recon. I suppose is probably kind of hard for him, but no one kills Call. If I lost Call, my game's over. And also, you wind up not getting the line breaker point. Overall, though, he was a really fun opponent. He plays really, really clean, which is really enjoyable. We had a judge call early over a really obscure guy dying out of transport. Does that proc the purge thing? But we handled it fine, and I'd love to play him again. Finally, my thoughts on the new Marine book. Honestly, I think Marines are going to be great. I like that there's several different builds with the different books. Like Iron Hands plays different than Ultras, plays different than Raven Guard, plays different than White Scars. In fact, I have a double Executioner, triple Invictor Ultramarines build that's been super duper fun, and I took an RTT with it a couple weeks ago. Specifically, I guess the Iron Hands matchup is totally a thing, and I wrote on Goonhammer my thoughts on it. Basically, it's if you also have Executioners, it feels like a Castellan duel. Otherwise, it kind of feels like the Triptide Tau matchup, where it's a ton of shooting. You're probably not going to kill the things, they're killy things, but it's a lot of points into not a lot of models, and with some okay terrain and some okay positioning, you might just be able to play the mission and just get there. I mean, it's still not going to be like how the Castellan was. A 5-up invo, even with -1 damage, is a lot, but it's only 16 wounds. It is T8, but it's kind of like shooting at a knight, and everyone can kill a knight. So I'm not as doom and gloom as maybe the rest of the community.
It appears that Kyle borrowed Tony's Echo mic for that one. Thanks a bunch, though, Mr. Thompson. And finally, let's hear from the man himself, Nick Nasty Boy Sutherland.
I'm running the same list I've been running. It's 12 Smashes, 15 Ludas, 3 Shock Mechs, one of them's the Relic, and 90 boys with about 63 grots. I outshoot every list. If there's no list that can go toe-to-toe with me. and key strategies are to keep my boys back, deep strike them and make some 8-inch charges, and take out a lot of the heavy armor with my smasher guns, ludas, and mechs. My hardest matchup came round 3. I managed to squeak it out 30-29. I had a 7-point bottom of 6 swing, so it was 23-29, and I managed to get it to 30-29. It was against White Scar Battalion and White Scar Successor Battalion. The list was very unique. It had 2 repulsors, Whirlwind Scorpius, 2 Phobos captains, 2 regular captains. One of them was on a bike with double warlord trait, and assault centurions, and 30 scouts. In our game, it was definitely a very tactical game. None of us really committed to going toe-to-toe. Well, I didn't commit to go toe-to-toe with my boys, and he didn't commit to go toe-to-toe with his repulsors or his relic Scorpius, so we just kind of stayed back and tried to play the mission pretty well and grab as many points as we could. I've definitely started building a Marine list myself, so I definitely knew a lot about them. I was discounting Assault Centurions. I was not including them in my list, and as they were ran with the White Scar Successor chapter, adding 3-inch range to them, I can definitely see how they can become powerful. They're able to put out close to exactly 72 shots of Hurricane Bolter at 27-inch range. That's going to be strength 4, AP -1, 1 damage each. They're also going to put out 12 flamer shots at 11-inch range. They are going to outflank, so they will be able to come in 9 inches away. And yeah, they're tough. 4 wounds each, I believe. 2 up armor. I was definitely discounting them, but in a White Scar list, I see how they do really well. I don't think they're going to do that well in Iron Hands list, but we'll see about that as well. My overall thoughts on the new Marines are that they're going to be a very, very strong list. I still think that my Ork list will be able to deal with them, but it will be close games. Some of my favorite builds are Iron Hands with 5 character dreads, 6 flyers. Iron Hands with 3 relic Sicarian Punisher tanks with 3 Redemptors. And White Scars with Assault Centurions. I like 30 Reavers in my White Scars list, and with the characters and stuff.
There you have it, folks. That wraps up the coverage from the Iron Halo. Before we go, we want to give a special shout out to Ben Irwin. He has been on the show a few times now to talk about how good Doritos are as basing materials, proper dog care around your models so they don't eat your bases, and perhaps most importantly, due to a series of wins with Eldar flyers at GTs and Majors over the last few months. He actually did come in 4th place at the Iron Halo, an act that just barely sealed him with the victory in the Lord Commander circuit over Dan Salmons. Never change, Chef Sherwin. Or do. We don't really own you. You do what you want.
I just want to say a personal RIP to the Dorito bases, and screw you, Mike Brandt, for making him change them.
Screw you, Mike Brandt.
Hey, man, that should be a bumper. Anyway, we'll let T.O. Jason Horn get the last word in as he gave us a sneak peek on what to expect next year.
The tournament was overall a great success. We raised over $4,000 for On the Rock Ministries, and it's one thing that we always do. So some of the things we want to improve on is next year we are planning on working with Andy on getting a bigger space, and stay tuned for more details about that. And you can check us out on Facebook at Iron Halo GT or on our website ironhalo.org.
Tournament news.
Hello everyone, this is Dustin from the Stutter Scrub Podcast, and you're listening to the 40K Stat Center.
From the height of competitive Southern 40K, although I thought that was Wargames Con, we move on to a GT for those who don't like their meat touching their potatoes, if you know what I mean. That's right, we're going to the Rock, and neither Sean Connery nor Nick Cage can get you off of it. Not for probably like the next 10 minutes or so anyway.
For sure, we're about to cover No Retreat 8, a 42-player, application-only mono kinda codex event.
So Pete may have been a little bit reluctant because this is an off the wall format, and 1750. A lot of the things that maybe people think Peter doesn't like, but listen, no retreat. Maybe it's just the fact that I've watched a lot of tabletop tactics in my day, and this is a tournament that Lawrence Baker has won 4 times with basically, from what I can tell, whatever Dark Eldar models he happens to grab on the way out the door. The no retreat format is an applicational, a not quite invitational. At any rate, you actually have to apply to go to this thing. It's on the Rock of Gibraltar, which is kind of between Africa and the Iberian Peninsula, aka Spain and Portugal.
Yeah,
And,
it's a British colony.
Unceded British territory. It's like the only colony that they didn't. They were like, you know what? We're gonna hold on to that rock.
Yeah, we want you. It's kind of nice when you think about it that they were the ones that they kept.
Yeah.
Anyway, that is besides the point. It's a comped event. It for some factions it's monocodex. For others, they're allowed to ally in, say, Imperial Knights, but they can only be Mechanicus if you're running AdMech. They can only be Imperialis if you're running, say, Space Marines. I would highly recommend you check out SN Battle Reports if you want to see the full list of list composition requirements.
Yeah.
It's actually a very interesting event. I have watched a few other internet personalities like Tabletop Tactics talk about it in the past. Val knows a little bit more about it than I do because, as he said earlier, while it's not that I have a hatred for these things, because of my dead-on focus for one particular style of event, it kind of leaves me blind to all of these other ones that you people decide you want to run for your fun.
And 36 minutes into a show, who knows if any of the people who would want to play an event like this are even still listening? I don't know, but if you are, look, if you're kind of still grumbling about soup and stews and everything mixing together, this format is actually, I think, really well crafted. I don't know what the meta would look like if people actually went out and tried to beat it to death, because it's also a very hobby central event. You actually have to meet a painting standard before you're allowed to go, which is kind of cool.
Yes, you have to send in like 5 headshots of your list for them to examine. Like when we say it's a popular event, they only have 42 slots. They always fill them. They never have a dropout. The model, like the armies, are all gorgeous that end up showing up.
So it's
and for people that are on the fence about this whole, are my Ultramarines allowed to be black or are my Iron Hands allowed to be blue?
No,
they don't allow that there.
Uh-uh.
You have to paint them to their chapter colors when you run them.
Yeah. So yeah, if your Ultramarines blue, your Ultramarines blue, and that's the thing coming into it, and it's a real big event. And obviously, no one actually lives on the Rock of Gibraltar except for Mr. Pardo, who's the proprietor of SM Battle Reports, and also, from what I can tell, someone who doesn't respond to my messages. Regardless, he's been running these events there. He's also running a regular format ITC event in March, which looks a little intriguing. Anyone who wants a not quite Africa, not quite Europe getaway GT destination, perhaps this is for you. But really what I was trying to emphasize is that I think this is there are very few truly alternative formats that exist really anymore. Everyone kind of plays more or less stock or even lesser versions than that, like Disallowing Index or Forge World or whatever. This tries to make monofaction kind of interesting and very themey by placing restrictions. There's also a 2 detachment limit per army, so essentially you've got to take either a battalion or a brigade plus another detachment is essentially what you're allowed to bring, and that other detachment can be allied in from something else. The other thing is too is you can only bring one like sub-faction keyword, so you can't even bring a sub-detachment of White Scars with your Ultramarines. You have to have them all the same one. So anyway, lots of neat stuff like that. Again, I have no idea how this would play out competitively, but if you're in a conservative meta or a place where a lot of people are turning their noses up at the competitive scene still, even though I'm pretty sure those places don't exist very much, or if you're just a person who prefers, not letting, different cultures mix, then hey, maybe the SN No Retreat Battle Reports format is for you. And
you went to a weird place there.
Well, that's
Pablo.
all I ever think when people
I
say
know.
pure lists is like, what are we talking about here? Like, you're looking for
I
purity?
understand.
You're looking for some purity? Anyway, moving right along. No, people who like monofaction doesn't mean you're someone who only likes monofaction. I'm going to get off this train because you're right. I'm Pabloing the hell out of this thing.
You're doing a really good job. It's almost like I invited him on instead.
Why don't we talk about what actually wound up winning? We're just going to cover this, I think, rather quickly, but I figured why not? Let's read these two wacky lists.
Sure.
As they are presented. Why don't you take the first one, because the second one is easier.
You want me to do the Chaos list, the one that would eventually win, or the Blood Angels?
Oh, wow. Yes.
Oh.
Yes. Do the Chaos list.
Okay, so the eventual winner of the event, who went 5-0, was Chris Tuttle, or Tutil, from Twisted Dice.
Tuttle.
He ran a Thousand Suns battalion detachment with Ahriman, 2 Demon Princes. He had 2 units of 10 Chaos Cultists, and then a unit of 28 Zangors with the Brayhorn. He then had a Zangor Shaman, and he allied in a Renegade Knight detachment. He had a Knight Despoiler with the Reaper Chainsword and Thunderstrike Gauntlet, and then a War Dog with the twin autocannons, and then 2 of the new Moirax War Dogs running double Lightning Lock.
Fantastic. So there you go. There's a good themey feel right there. You've got a monofaction core detachment there. Zinchi Chaos Space Marines, Thousand Suns, of course. And then, you just sort of add a little bit of soupçon of the Renegade Knights. It's very nice. It's delightful. And then moving over to his opponent in the final round, and also the only person who returned our messages, although I must say that Mr. Tutil, as Peter calls him, was just sort of caught between travel and work and wasn't able to record for us. So no worries there, bud, if you happen to listen to this. Getting back over to his opponent, though, Joe Moscardini. Probably like Moscardini or something like that. At any rate, he's running Blood Angels, folks. Just Blood Angels. And, pretty straightforward. Here it is. It's a battalion detachment with a Primaris captain and a Primaris lieutenant leading that sucker. And then he's got 4 units of intercessors. I did read. Are my old eyes deceiving me? That is what I saw, correct? Yeah.
You definitely saw it. It's 3 units of 5 and a unit of 10 intercessors.
There you go. And there's a reason for that, because he's also got 3 super casual repulsor executioners coming along for the list. And that's the whole thing.
You forgot 2 very important models to what make the units tick.
Oh.
He's got a Smash Captain, everybody knows and loves, and a Primaris Ancient, which is very important for the Blood Angels.
Where is this? Oh, there it is. Jeez.
Right in the middle.
It's like we don't even rehearse. At any rate, that's his list. He did get back to us. Why don't we kick it over and let Joe maybe give us a little bit of background on his feelings about the event, run down his list, and talk about his final match.
Yeah, so total experience of the event, overwhelmingly positive. I absolutely love No Retreat. This is my 3rd time going, and I would encourage anyone who's thinking about applying and taking a chances of getting a spot to go for it, because for my money and my time, it is the absolute best 40k event on the planet. And it's a truly global event. So over the 3 times that I've been, I've seen players from Australia, from Russia, from the States, from Canada, so truly everywhere in the world. And while it is a tournament and a phenomenal tournament at that, it is a lot more than that as well. It's 4 days of hobby nirvana spent with 40 awesome, like-minded people who love the game as much as I do. And you leave with 40 new awesome friends, so I'll be going for as long as they'll have me. So, building for monofaction actually isn't a big change for me, because I play monofaction in every event I go to, ITC, ETC, whatever. Just a personal preference. I don't frown upon super or anything like that. I just like to play that way. to challenge myself. So No Retreat is great because it kind of forces everyone to play by the same rules that I'm playing by, which obviously gives me a big advantage. But if you think about a specific list consideration, knowing that I'm going into that field, the plasmas on the executioners would be a good example of that. You don't see them very often, despite the fact they mathematically are comparable to the laser or even outperform it in many, many situations. But where they do fall down is against big minuses, and obviously flyer spam is a big source of that. Flyer spam isn't allowed in No Retreat, so taking them was an obvious choice because the big weakness is simply not a factor in the format. Yeah, so the way I approach playing the list, you would fairly assume, looking at the list on paper, that it's all about the 3 repulsor executioners. To a degree, that's true, of course, but actually the way the list wins is typically through utilizing those 25 intercessors, particularly in combination with the Blood Angels, Relic, 5+, Feel No Pain, banner that's on the Ancient. So over the first 2 to 3 turns of the game, the job of the repulsors is actually not to kill things that kill repulsors, it's to kill things that kill intercessors. You are assuming, actually, and more often than not, that your repulsors will be dead by turn 3 or so, but that your intercessors will largely be intact, and your opponent's ability to deal with them will be mitigated. They're very difficult to kill without specific tools, and that's particularly true with the Blood Angels 5+ Feel No Pain banner. Yeah, so the MVPs of the list, building on the previous point, most definitely the intercessors. They are the unit that actually wins you the game 9 times out of 10. And particularly as Blood Angels intercessors with that 5+ Feel No Pain banner are not only extremely durable but also extremely versatile. Shock Assault was a huge deal for them because it really enhances the value that you're already getting out of the 2 attacks with Red Thirst by bumping it up to 3. A unit of Blood Angels intercessors is very capable in almost any scenario on the tabletop, and specifically is extremely good at bullying your opponents. Let's call them scoring units. And that's, to build on my previous point, how I typically win games, by getting into a position where it's my intercessors versus those kinds of units, and I can win. Yeah, so the last game of the tournament, I went into game 5 on 4 max wins. I was the only player in that position, so in a really strong position to win the event. I think, actually, all I needed to do was not lose max, which unfortunately, of course, fate being what it is, I did. And that was due to an enormous mistake that I made in that final game. I was playing against Chris, and he had a Knight Rampager, and I miscalculated, just in my head, the total threat range that it had for a turn 1 charge, and I deployed a little bit too far forward, which allowed that turn 1 charge to happen, which more or less led to the game being over pretty quickly. So big mistake from me that I won't be making again, but big props to Chris, my opponent. He played beautifully, and of course it's his job to exploit mistakes that his opponent makes, which he did.
Thank you very much, Joe, for sharing your insights on the No Retreat 8 tournament over in Gibraltar. Also, I think it's plainly obvious at this point that we have a fetish for unusually located tournaments here on Stat Center, so glad we could have a voice from someone who went to this event. And for anyone who's interested, coming down the pipe, like I said, a normal format, well, and by that I mean ITC format event coming up in March of 2020. And then I'm sure they'll be sending around the weird boxes of invites for the next No Retreat at some point in the next few months as well. So, with that all said, let's hit a button.
Tournament news.
This is Colin.
This is Mitch.
This is Chuck.
And we're from the Best in Faction podcast, and you're listening to 40K Stat Center, where one host has a really strange nickname and the other one's called the Falcon.
Yes, that's right. My name is Val Heffelfinger, and now we're going to bring a little bonus content here that actually is kind of episode 15 and a half. Last week, of course, we didn't record, but we kind of meant to, sort of. And Pete actually did a little bit of a take on his own about the Space Marine meta, and then I almost blinded myself with a butter knife and forgot my laptop at work. Unrelated events, but nonetheless, we didn't get an episode out. So for your listening pleasure, we're going to kick it over to Pete from like 5 days ago, talking about what the Space Marine meta is bringing to a table near you.
Hey guys, it's your boy Falcon, coming in hot with stats on Space Marines so far. I've managed to record 13 events since Marine launch, and just shy of 4,800 games that have allowed the use of the new codex and its earliest supplements. The results are intriguing and kind of align with my earliest predictions. You may recall about 6 weeks or so ago on Chapter Tactics, Sean Morgan, myself, Pablo, we all went over how we predicted the Space Marine Codex leaks would impact the meta as a whole. I'd mentioned I felt that Marines would eventually end up being about 20, maybe even 30% of the meta. They'd have a pretty middling win rate, and that their T-Whip would be pretty high based on what we'd seen so far and the rumors that we'd gotten from, just offhand words from playtesters and GW themselves. Before we get too deep into where they are now, let's take a quick look back at how they've been performing since the Spring FAQ. So, prior to this Codex launch, and like I said, after the Spring FAQ, Space Marines as a primary faction accounted for about 5.5% of all lists in the meta. Of those lists, 65% were run as a single Codex. They boasted a 45% win rate as a primary, and 44.5% when they were run as mono faction. The only factions actually that were performing worse were their Power Armored Brothers, Grey Knights, Blood Angels, Space Wolves, and Dark Angels. And that's in order of top to bottom by win rate. Over 51% of Marine lists were being run as Ultramarines, and almost exclusively with Mr. Rubber Booty Gullyman, with Raven Guard and Salamanders being next in popularity at about 11 to 12% apiece. Ultramarines lists actually had a pretty respectable 50.5% win rate. From a competitive standpoint in the post-Spring FAQ world, Marines had a T-Whip of about 1.76%, with 3 lists having gone undefeated since May. And they had an abysmal average first-round loss of 1.67. Once again, for those of you unaware, the T-Whip statistic stands for tournaments and winning position. It looks at all lists that have gone at least 4 games before suffering their first loss. We've noted that the most healthy factions from a purely tabletop standpoint tend to have a T-Whip that is relatively in line with the percent of the time their faction is taken as a primary in lists. Between it and the average first loss statistics, you're generally getting a more accurate depiction of faction performance at high-level play than win rates. Win rates can be skewed pretty easily, especially at mid and lower tier tables. You can look at Orks as an example. They've consistently won or top forward a number of large events since their release, but have rarely made it above a 50% win rate. Now, if we look at the last 3 to 4 weeks, in the 4,800 games of data I've collected so far, Marines have shown a pretty dramatic swing. They've gone from that 5.5% of meta to being almost 12.85% already. The swing here seems to have been through small numbers across the board for factions in that time period. The only other factions that really saw a significant change in their use post-Marine release have been Imperial Knights, which went from about 10% of the meta to 7.5%, but also Chaos Knights, which went up from 2.5 to 5 in representation. Most other factions only saw changes at or below about 1%, so it seems that there's not really one faction that everyone has dropped to pick up the Marines. It's pretty even across the board. Marines have also now boasted a win rate of just over 52%, which puts them in the same target range as Tau and Drukhari in that same time period. And they have a mono-faction win rate that's actually 1% higher, just shy of 53%. It shouldn't be a shock that due to doctrine and supplement functionality that mono-faction Space Marines now make up over 91% of all Marine lists. Marine lists are also getting about 2 more victory points per game on average in ITC-based missions, and they're giving up 1 point less putting them at an average VP per game of 23.5, which is relatively in line with most other codexes. Before, they were very low. They were almost at the bottom of the scale. But that 22.5 VP against they now have is really only bettered by Tau, who sit at about a 22.47. So they're almost deadlocked when it comes to like factions with a statistically significant amount of games, at least. Harlequins are lower than that still, but they have very few. They've been used very little as a primary faction, and that's always been the case. Prior to Codex release, Marines were only really consistently beating Tyranids. They had a 57% win rate against them. And everybody else in Power Armor, they had about a 56 to 58% win rate against Blood Angels, Grey Knights, and Dark Angels. But they were getting the crap kicked out of them by Knights. They only had a 33% win rate against Knights. Drukhari, they only had a 36% win rate. Tau and Custodes, 38%. So far, in these last few weeks, the current builds that people have been using seem to have struggled against Necrons. They only have a 27% win rate over about 30 games against Necrons. They have a 38% win rate against Custodes. Those Calated Scrap Tanks still doing work. And surprisingly, a 40% win rate against Death Guard, although this seems to be more at lower tables. These are first and second round losses more than anything else. While they are beating Orks about 65% of the time, they're beating Demons 69% of the time, and Chaos Space Marines 64%. Don't put too much into these numbers just yet. Usually when it comes to faction versus faction, we need a lot more than even 4,800 games on record to get a really good gauge for what's beating what. But it's starting to give an idea of at least where the current meta is going to run. That being said, these numbers in particular are probably going to take a little while to grow, and I'm probably going to actually have to split them out by supplement, because some of these supplements are already looking like they play completely different from each other. Iron Hands and Raven Guard are almost polar opposites in terms of what kind of list you're generally going to want to run, for example. So it'll be interesting to see how it all pans out. So as I was saying, like, these numbers are all pretty good. They're nice. I wouldn't call any of them, other than that their faction representation and that average VP against dramatic. Even that average VP against 22.5, like, your worst factions are only 24, so it's hard to say how much weight you should put in that. But that list representation being at almost 13, those are numbers that we haven't seen since Guard with Castellan, which occasionally, in a similar time period or in a similar amount of tournaments, would boast something like that, a 12 or a 13% faction representation. What's probably the biggest indicator of their impact so far has been the immediate skyrocket they've had in T-Whip. Like I said, they weren't even at 2% of T-Whip prior to the Codex. But over these last 13 events, Space Marines now account for more than 20% of all lists that have been in a winning position. And they now have an average loss of 2.12, which is pretty high. They're definitely higher out there, but when you combine the two stats, like, this is a very, very powerful release. We also have to keep in mind this data does not include the Battle for Birmingham or the GW GT Heat 3, because I wasn't able to get lists from either of those events. However, both did allow the Codex and supplements. What we do know from those events is that Marines also placed highly in them. There were 2 Marine-less lists in the top 4 that got to that T-Whip score at Birmingham, and 2 of the undefeated lists at the GW GT were also mono-faction Astartes. Now, if we compare this to other big Codex releases in recent history, it's very clear that this may be the norm, at least from a T-Whip ratio, though perhaps not in terms of just how dramatic it is. If you look at Genestealer cults, they went from being just shy of 1% of the meta to 4.2 within a similar release window, and they boasted about an 8% T-Whip with a similar amount of events. Imperial Knights went from about 3 to 4% of the meta to over 10%. Their TWIP has always been around 12%. They had a brief spike in the first, I would say, week after launch where they were at about a 15, but since then they've kind of toned themselves down to a point where their TWIP is about representative with their list percentage. And then you had Orks, which went from 2 to 3% of the meta to 6, and they've on and off held about a 10% TWIP. So the ratios have been pretty good. Nothing in that 20% range, but also, other than Knights, none of these factions have been, 13, 14% of the meta, or even close. So yeah, the difference here is definitely scale. And I think the other one that we need to consider is the fact that this really isn't even Space Marine's final form. We still have 5 supplements that have yet to see tournament play. And several of them seem to be on an even bigger power level than what we currently had. White Scars are definitely deadly, and I'm not sure if they've been figured out yet. But Iron Hands, on paper, definitely look like they are something that people need to account for and may need to build a list completely to try and take out, which is something most of the other Marines lists, I would say you didn't have to consider as well. I'm really curious to see how this meta evolves once all the supplements are in place. I'm a little worried that Creep's gotten a bit out of hand, but you never know. Maybe a few carefully applied FAQs and then some kind of realigning of the current codex lists we're seeing from everybody else. They might be able to keep it in check. I'm really hopeful, though. If these numbers skew any further, it definitely becomes really dangerous. My assumption is that we'll be able to see by SoCal Open just what kind of landscape this codex is terraformed into being. Anyway, until then, folks, keep calm and get good. I'll talk to you later.
Not so fast, Pete. You're going to talk to us right now. So thank you for recording that, and it was some nice ready-made content in the can. My follow-up question was, I mean, with Iron Halo at 20%. What is the stat center over under? I think I once have already said in message 40% Marines at some point. Do you think we'll see a share of the meta that huge?
Well, I do mention in that clip that I predicted on Chapter Tactics a couple months back at 25 to 30%. I felt 40 was the top out. 40 is like the cap. I can't see it ever getting higher than 40% without the game completely breaking. Essentially, everyone would have to move to War Machine or some other game for it to hit a 40% marker. But I think a 25 to 30 is definitely not out of the question, and I feel we'll see that at SoCal Open once Iron Hands is in everybody's hands, and then Imperial Fists, because we've heard time and again from playtesters, from Reese, Pablo.
What's the date on SoCal?
SoCal is the last weekend in October, so end of this month.
That one. Yeah.
And I know that a big reason why Reese has held off on the rules and only just now announced that he's putting the cutoff as the 19th, essentially 7 days before SoCal actually occurs, is to try and get as many of these supplements in. I think there's a hope that by that time, any Iron Hands FAQ will be out, and that we'll have the Imperial Fists and Salamander's codex supplements, I should say, in our hands. And so you'll have a pretty decent picture. We haven't heard anybody talk about Black Templar yet. I'm assuming they're the final supplement, but if there's not any talk about it, it leads me to believe it's not as strong as what we're about to see.
Yeah. I mean, when they first announced this supplement arrangement, I think they said 6 books, right?
Yeah, I believe it's 6 or 7 is in the picture.
Oh, geez.
I know that it's based off of the leaks. Imperial Fists does include Crimson Fists as well.
Oh, okay.
Which makes sense. And if there is a 7th, then it really just leaves Black Templar as the only option. It is possible that it's tied into the Imperial Fists book as well, just like Crimson Fists is. But yeah, I think at this point, people have made it pretty clear what they feel the strongest on paper codexes are. And I think you've seen it also and these same people have also said they like Raven Guard and White Scars. They're not slouches by any means, and they're probably a better supplements for like higher tier play. There's just a lot more failure points with these factions is the concern, right?
Yeah.
And I think you'll like. There's a lot of little things to possibly be trepidatious about, as I would say. But I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that once everything comes out, we get our FAQs, things will settle. We'll hit that 25 to 30% mark, and then maybe we drop down and we stay steady at about 20. That would be, I think, a healthy place for Space Marines, given their position in the lore as, you know, the be all end all for Games Workshop.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I don't actually have. I mean, aside from Grey Knights, and for some reason, a massive collection of Space Wolves that I've just bought for nothing recently. But like, I like Space Marines in a bird dog seat. I like the quality of these rules. Maybe some of the Iron Hand stuff is a little over the top, but overall, I mean, the stuff that I've seen, the way it plays is just, it's a lot of fun, and I think it's going to really challenge people sticking to other factions to innovate and react to it, because the Marines are awesome, and yeah. I think pretty much everyone's going to have at least a fantasy of starting a Space Marine army right now.
So I just want to quote Tony on this. Recently, he and I and Tom Layton were having a talk about Space Marines and how strong the Iron Hands are, or at least on paper. And what he said kind of hit home for me. It's that he said, things shouldn't exist that can increase player performance so much without a same increase in player skill. And I think that's my main problem with the potential strength of Iron Hands, and maybe Imperial Fists, if they're everything they're going to be cut up to be, is we've seen it in the past where like the Castellan list, before it got FAQ'd into a more like reasonable place, was pretty much a joke to play. It didn't require a ton of player skill. It made up for it with infinite CP and 120 point models that could kill 600 point models easily without any negatives.
Yeah, I can see that. I suppose I'm just of the frame of mind that we need to see how the market reacts here, and the market being what we refer to as the meta.
And I agree. I mean, like I said in the clip, I'm hopeful that people will, just adjust. The thing about the meta is it's always this kind of like weird circling beast, like this, where something comes up on top and then everybody techs to beat that thing. And with Marines possibly being 20-30% of the meta, 40% even, everybody else is going to 100% have to tech to beat Marines, just like people tech to beat Imperial Knights.
Yeah.
And maybe that will be all it needs to self-regulate. Maybe it doesn't. Who knows? We'll find out.
We'll find out, and the game will go on, and if it's really that bad, guys, don't worry. GW's got our backs. One more bump.
Tournament news.
Hi, I'm Chris from Canhammer, and you're listening to 40K Stat Center.
Or you were listening to 40K Stat Center, because I think, dear Peter, that pretty much wraps things up for this week.
That's everything I had to say. What about you?
Well, I'm just really happy to be back in the saddle again. I'm glad to see some tournaments going down. I'm so happy to see how upset everyone is out there about all kinds of things going on. It's a wonderful day to be active in the 40K scene.
I love every minute of it. I wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah, no, it's strange, but very true. So, yeah. Got anything else to add?
Bye-bye.
This has been 40K Stat Center, a presentation of the Frontline Gaming Podcast Network. Like what we do? Subscribe to and rate us on YouTube and wherever podcasts can be found. Join the conversation. Follow 40K Stat Center on Facebook. You can also support the show directly by joining the Chapter Tactics Patreon and competitive 40K in general via the ITC Patreon, or by grabbing a subscription to BCP.